UK has a different position. But that was an interesting line, that President Trump has changed the conversation but created an opportunity.
Yeah, I think that was the most important line to come out of the Prime Minister's intervention there. He said that President Trump has changed the global conversation and with that created opportunities. He is our Prime Minister, the British Prime Minister, having to perform a very delicate balancing act because the fundamentals of diplomacy have transformed over the last few weeks. No longer is the US squarely behind Ukraine. Instead, you've got Donald Trump positioning himself as more of a mediator between Ukraine and Russia, as kind of like the middleman between two equal sides, whereas, of course, for the UK and European allies, that's an absolute abhorrent position because they squarely view Vladimir Putin as the aggressor, Ukraine as the victim, and any negotiation needing to be done on terms that are just and fair for Ukraine. But obviously, Donald Trump is not the kind of person who takes direct criticism very well. And so for Keir Starmer, he's clearly, he's stepped up to this position of leadership within Europe, given the UK still has a significant military capability, in particular nuclear weapons within NATO, in terms of European NATO. He doesn't have a very big conventional force, it has to be said. However, it is a traditional position that the UK adopts, and the Prime Minister is stepping into that. He will be stepping onto a plane and flying to Washington later this week, where he will be talking with Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky. When he was speaking at an annual news conference yesterday, was making very clear that these diplomatic overtures by Europe, President Macron of France is due in Washington today, then Keir Starmer on Thursday, talking to Donald Trump about the need for the allies to stay together. The Prime Minister also talked about the backstop, didn't he, in his intervention just then? This US backstop, we don't know what it would look like, but it's referring to whatever kind of security force the Europeans propose to deploy into Ukraine in the wake of any ceasefire agreement with Russia to deter future Russian attacks. They believe that it would only be credible with some kind of American element. The Ukrainians also believe that only America can deter Russia, but we don't know whether Donald Trump is up for that. At the moment, he's very much locked on trying to secure a minerals deal with Ukraine. If that gets across the line, maybe his position will soften. He's clearly a deal maker and wants to be a peacemaker, but he needs to have Ukraine and the Europeans on board for any hope of a sustainable peace.
Deborah, great analysis as always. Thank you very much indeed. Deborah Haynes there live for us in the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, this morning, just as we heard there from Keir Starmer saying that President Trump had changed the global conversation but created an opportunity, just as he prepares to head, as Deborah was saying, across to the United States, to the White House a little later on this week. OK, you're watching Sky News Today. Coming up in a couple of minutes, though, it is Business Live with me. We're going to be looking at Germany and those elections, but can the new German government fix its economy? That and much more in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned. The top business stories live from Sky News HQ. Conservatives win the German elections, but can they turn Europe's biggest economy around? We'll look at the state of business in Ukraine 3 years on from the Russian invasion. Plus, what can be done to prevent the repeat of the world's biggest crypto heist? A very good morning on this Monday and welcome to Business Live with me, Darren McCaffrey. Thanks for your company. We're going to start with some breaking news this morning. Bring in our city editor, Mark Lyman, who's got the latest. Mark, what have you got for us?
That's right, Darren. On this Monday morning, news of yet another London-listed company which has attracted takeover interest from a private equity firm. Now, the company in question is called Chemring, which is a FTSE 250 manufacturer of high-tech defence equipment, also makes products used by the likes of Elon Musk's SpaceX company and NASA. Now, Chemring has drawn interest from Bain Capital, one of the world's biggest private equity firms. I understand that Bain made an approach and an offer for Chemring in recent weeks. What we're not clear about at this stage, Darren, is whether that takeover interest from Bain Capital is ongoing. And if it's no longer ongoing, I suspect that neither side will feel obliged to make a statement to the London Stock Exchange. But if Bain is still in active contemplation of a takeover bid for Chemring, then it will be forced by the takeover panel to make a public statement. Now, Chemring has a market valuation of about £1 billion. If you factor in a conventional takeover premium, that would make it worth probably about £1.3 billion. And it would be, as I say, the latest in a string of London-listed companies. Think of Royal Mail's parent company, Britvic, and Learning Technologies Group, which in recent weeks has agreed to be taken private by a private equity firm, General Atlantic. And we are seeing a string of these deals because London-listed stocks at the moment are perceived as being significantly undervalued relative to their international peers. And we're also seeing, as in the case of BP, more activist investors appearing on shareholder registers and therefore forcing boards to contemplate significant corporate activity. Now, Chemring shares have risen by about 15% on the news that I revealed about 20 minutes ago on the Sky News website about this bid from Bain Capital. We'll wait to see whether there is a statement, Darren, in response.
OK, Mark, thank you very much indeed for that. Mark Lyman with the breaking news this morning. Let's go to Germany now, because it's woken up to a big change this morning. The leader of the Conservative CDU, Friedrich Merz, is set to become the next Chancellor as he gets to work in forming a new coalition government. Well, one thing that hasn't changed, though, is the German economy. It still may be the biggest in Europe, but it is shrinking. GDP down 0.2% last year and 0.3% in 2023. Its motor industry is stalling with competition from China and the threat of tariffs from Donald Trump. So what can be done to turn it around? Well, delighted to say I'm joined by Tu Nguyen, who is Deputy Director of the Jacques Delors Centre think tank. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. Just first of all, contextualise a little bit, if you can, about how bad things are in Germany. Let's be honest about that. They've just not seen any growth for years, really since the pandemic.
Yes, so the economic situation in Germany is not good. And Friedrich Merz also campaigned for the chancellorship on the position that he will come into office and turn around the economy and also make radical changes in order to do so. And now the big question is whether there will be a government and whether he can lead a government with which he can implement the visions that he has, which is really an emphasis also on deregulation, less taxes, and also less spending on welfare and social policies.
But also there are a lot of people who say that actually something that should change is this cold break, if you like, when it comes to spending. And yet I read this morning, we haven't got a government yet, clearly, but if it is this grand coalition that involves, Olaf Scholz, maybe not him, but at least the SPD, that break is not likely to change. And in many ways, people will be frustrated by that because they feel that Germany should lift the pedal, if you like, and properly invest in infrastructure.
Yes, so I think the problem is less with the SPD. So what we have in Germany is this constitutional debt brake that very much limits the spending of the government. There's now the question whether or not to reform it and how to reform it and for what purposes. The problem is, in order to reform the debt brake, you need a majority in parliament of 2/3. And the CDU, the SPD, and the Greens do not have this majority. They are 6 seats short for this constitutional 2/3 majority, and they require the left if they want to reform the debt brake. Now, the left is in favor of reforming the debt brake, but only for social spending, investment in social policies and welfare policies and infrastructure. They are firmly opposed to spending more on defense and military. And this is what the CDU wants to do, to reform or at least to ramp up defense spending on national level. So the question is now how to square this and how to get the left on board. So the problem is less with the SPD and the Grand Coalition, but really with the way the parliament is constituted right now and the minorities that can block a reform.
Yeah, and indeed, I'm sure some even within the CDU, because they've been, of course, the biggest supporter, haven't they, of that break. Let's just finally look at the bigger, wider picture here. We know, and we're marking it today, 3 years on since the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Clearly, there is now a schism, if you like, when it comes to the approach of that war with the United States. So it seems in terms of defence and military and diplomacy, there is a split with the United States. Economically, could this mean that actually Germany tries to kind of double down on its EU membership, that it looks for greater EU unity, not just in terms of security measures, which we've been talking elsewhere on Sky today, but maybe economically too?
I think that is definitely an option. Friedrich Merz has campaigned as a very European chancellor. So he sees himself as a big European. He wants to take on leadership in the EU. He wants a bigger role for Germany in the EU. And that, of course, also involves the question of how Germany can form a unified European response to Russia for Ukraine, both on the defense side and the economic side. And one question will be whether there will be a European defense fund, so joint borrowing at European level or not. So far, Friedrich Merz has said that he is not excluding it explicitly. He said we can talk about everything, but the first question needs to be the prioritization of funding and of money before we can talk about joint more debt. But that is, of course, one of the issues that will come up as a very urgent task for the next government.
Yeah, indeed, fascinating stuff. And we may well take, of course, months to form that coalition. We'll see how it goes. Okay, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. We were talking about Ukraine there, weren't we? Because it is 3 years since, as we said, Russia invaded with its forces into Ukraine. And one of the biggest questions facing the country is the future of its economy and particularly its mineral resources. President Trump has his eyes on a deal with Ukraine to access the country's natural resources in exchange for weapons. But it is unclear whether President Zelensky will sign it, though he suggested he potentially will. Well, let's go to Kyiv, speak to Christopher Miller. He's chief Ukraine correspondent for the Financial Times. Just before we get on to kind of some of the basics around the economy, I know the FT have done a lot of stuff in the last couple of days, a lot of investigative reporting into some of the kind of war crimes, as many would describe them, in order to inflict as much damage on Ukraine as possible, not least of all the execution, it seems, of Ukrainian troops.
That's right. One of the defining features of Russia's full-scale invasion that we have come to see over the last 3 years, and increasingly so, a dramatic rise in war crimes and these executions by Russian soldiers of Ukrainian POWs on the battlefield over the course of the last year. At the FT, we produced a documentary called Film Me, which is about this very issue. Russian soldiers on the battlefield executing Ukrainians after they surrender, put their arms up in the air, and are prepared to be taken captive. Russians are executing them on the battlefield. This is something that Ukrainian prosecutors have told us they've seen a dramatic spike in. And again, it's one of the defining features of Russia's full-scale invasion.
Christopher, let's talk about the economy if we can. we've often talked about the fact that Ukraine has been the breadbasket, didn't we, at the start of this war? And we talked a lot about trying to get the movement of goods back up and running again. And yet, again, its economy could be at the centre of these peace negotiations, not least of all when it comes to its mineral wealth.
It could be. Yeah, certainly Ukraine is known as the breadbasket of Europe. It's known for its black soil agribusiness, of course. That has been greatly disrupted by Russia's war in Ukraine. But one of the things that is being discussed right now is this mineral deal that the Ukrainians are hammering out in really difficult negotiations with the Trump administration. So Olya Stefanishyna, the deputy prime minister of Ukraine, just said just shortly ago that they're in the final stages of this deal. The Americans view this as being upwards of hundreds of billions of dollars for them. Donald Trump has put a $500 billion price tag on this. The Ukrainians, and particularly President Zelensky yesterday, came out and said he doesn't see this being a $500 billion deal for the Americans. This number it seems to have appeared out of thin air from Donald Trump. Zelensky says he knows that the Americans have provided roughly $100 billion of assistance since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion. And so they're trying to cut a deal with the Americans for around that amount of money. Again, these negotiations have been going on now for well over a week. They've been intense, and the Ukrainians are hoping to secure not only an economic deal with the United States in this, but also a security agreement. What they want is not only to pay America back for its assistance, but they want the Americans to provide future security guarantees and continued military assistance.
And just finally, Christopher, there's also talk, isn't there, about Russian assets that have been frozen all around the world and how that money needs to be reused, if you like, to help rebuild Ukraine. But again, that's almost certainly going to be part of these negotiations.
I think that's right. Certainly the Ukrainians would like to see these frozen Russian funds be used to help in its war efforts. They want actually to see these funds unfrozen and provided to them so that they can actually purchase weaponry from the West, and particularly from the United States, which has been its largest security backer and, of course, has much deeper stocks than European armies at the moment.
OK, Christopher, really appreciate your time live from Kyiv this morning. Thank you very much indeed. Well, let's speak to Dima Dinega, who is owner and founder of Dima's Vodka, who joins us this morning. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Just talk, first of all, about your business and how, Dima, it's been impacted by the last 3 years.
Morning. Thank you for having me on the anniversary of the 3 years of full-scale Ukrainian resistance against the invasion. So the business has been impacted, obviously, massively from the beginning. So the vodka is still made there in a place called Zhytomyr, which is about 140 kilometers west of Kyiv. And that city, sadly, has been shelled throughout. And a story that kind of really defines it. So I remember in April 2023, I called them to see if they're okay after an attack. And obviously, are you okay means far more. It's about survival. And they called me back saying they had no power, no electricity, no water. I said, can I help in any way? 3 days later, I received a call saying, amazing, Dima, would love to have your help, but we can make vodka again. So the resilience is remarkable. The economy is still going and people are doing their best to promote Ukraine and keep the economy going.
I mean, it is quite remarkable, as you say, that, in the most difficult of times, businesses can still exist, they can still operate. Just when it comes to your business, is this mainly for domestic consumption? Are you managing to export any of the vodka that you make?
So it's actually fully exported. So the vodka for me has always been a way of showcasing Ukrainian culture, traditions, toasting. So budmo is a very famous phrase in Ukraine, which means let us be, which obviously is remarkably poignant in the last 3 years. So for me, it's very much to showcase Ukraine, its amazing vodka making ability. And actually, as Christopher said, the amazing black soil, fertile soil that provides incredible grains that Ukraine exports around the world.
And talking about potentially a deal to bring about lasting peace, what would you want to see economically from the West, from Russia, to try and make Ukraine a viable and prosperous place in the years to come? I mean, does that mean essentially for you, for example, having access to those Russian assets that I've just been talking about that are frozen around the world?
Well, the main thing for Ukraine now that happens is that it has a lasting and just peace. I think a ceasefire is talked about, but ceasefires, as sadly history has proven, always tend to be very temporary. So for me, it's very important that when Ukraine, people are already investing back into Ukraine, already trying to help Ukraine as much as possible, that very much continues once they are able to do so with security guarantees.
OK, Dima, good luck with it all and with those vodka sales in the months and years to come. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Now, this weekend's theft of $1.5 billion worth of crypto tokens is thought to be the biggest ever heist to hit the industry. The Dubai-based exchange, Bybite, says that hackers managed to steal a wallet of Ethereum and transfer it to an unknown address. It's now seeking help to try and recover the assets. So how might that have happened, and what could be done to prevent future large-scale crypto thefts? Let's speak to Pascal Gauthier, who is Chief Executive of the crypto security company Ledger. Very good morning to you, Pascal. Just talk us through here what has gone on. How did these guys manage to steal $1.5 billion?
Well, look, I don't want to go too technical, not to lose the audience, but what can be said?
Don't do that. I don't think you should do that, but briefly, if you can.
Yeah, no, just hackers are always more aggressive and always more savvy about the space. And as the price is going up, the value is going up, you can imagine that there will be more hacking. And so therefore, the problem that we have in crypto right now is not all companies are at the security standards that they should be at in order to protect such value. And what happened, sadly, to Bybit is the technology and the setup that they use was not up to date and was not strong enough to resist this kind of attack. And
Pascal, is it easier to steal Bitcoin, for example, than it is to try and hack into someone's bank account and steal money?
Yeah, exactly. That's the right question. And so the answer is yes. It's much easier to steal because two things. One, what Bitcoin or Ethereum is a cryptographic secret. So it's one little piece of code. And if you take that away, then you can transfer basically Ethereum or Bitcoin wherever you want. And so therefore your secret is no longer a secret. And that transaction is irreversible. Once it's gone, which is very different with the current financial system that we're in. And so therefore, security has to be redesigned, and security standards that Ledger are designing are redesigned so you don't compromise on security, and so therefore you make it 100% secure so the funds never go away, because otherwise it's just a question to get them back, and that's nearly impossible.
And just finally, Pascal, then, for lots of people watching who have been critical about Bitcoin in the past or different types of crypto coin, they will say this is a reminder of why actually it's not sustainable and that in the end you probably shouldn't put your money into that. You've got a smile on your face. What do you think about that?
Well, you know, money is money, and so people will try to steal money, whether it's Bitcoin or something else. And I think that at Ledger we've been promoting the highest standards of security in the space. And so what we say is, don't leave your coins on an exchange. They're better with you on a Ledger device. And if you're a financial institution, you should adopt Ledger Enterprise because this is the highest grade of security in this industry right now. You should not compromise on security. You should not try to save money on security because, after all, when this happens, exactly to your point, people lose confidence in Bitcoin and Ethereum when it should not, because this is 100% the future of finance. And so that future only happens if the security is without compromise.
OK, really fascinating stuff this morning. Thank you, Pascal, there for joining us live from Dubai on that massive heist, $1.5 billion. OK, you're watching Business Live on this Monday morning. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, we'll be looking at how the markets are doing. The FTSE up a fraction. All the details after this commercial break. Stay tuned.
This is how you travel when the mafia wants to kill you.
He's almost given up his own freedom, but that's the price he's willing to pay.
Here, they don't just arrest 'Ndrangheta mafia members, they also live among them. Time after time, I've seen the devastating impact of extreme weather and climate change.
We don't have much snow at the moment.
They've had a warm spring and exceptionally hot summer, and that means they're expecting to lose more than 3 times the amount of ice than they usually do.
Flames are still forcing people from their homes and leaving many questioning their futures.
Here was my life. We have nothing. I can't say anything, it's so sad.
This disaster is testing the resolve of everyone on this island.
The only way out now is by boat.
Everything you see is devastated, and the misery being felt by people living here is repeated in towns and villages across Central Europe. Sky News, get the full story first.
Turkey is burying its dead. The loss is profound.
Whole families died in this collapse, generations wiped out. The violence has penetrated the heart of the city rather than being contained to the estates around the edge, and that speaks to the level of anger being felt here.
In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash. This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
This is an example of an advert, really. Anyone of any age could say, I'll do that for £1 million, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
You want to talk business? Meet me in the On-Board Lounge. Flying Merz, fly better. Thank you.
Welcome back. Let's have a look at how those markets are doing in more detail now. Speak to Russ Moulds, Investment Director at AJ Bell. Very good morning to you. Let's start with B&M Bargains if we can. Not doing terribly well, are they? Difficult trading, it seems.
Yeah, they've coughed up another mild profit warning of about a 3% disappointment relative to forecast, blaming the uncertain economic outlook and some unhelpful foreign exchange movements. Whether this is telling us that things are getting even tougher for some of those for the more sort of traditional B&M target demographic in the lower income brackets, things getting even tougher for them, or whether it's they've just missed a trick competitively, it may be somewhere between the two. But even though it's a mild downgrade, the shares are down 9%. That means they've halved over the past year, so there probably won't be too many tears shed that Chief Executive Alex Russo's announced his retirement. I think there's a widespread perception he's kind of overpromised and underdelivered.
Yeah, I just realised it's called the B&M Bargains. I think I've called it that for a while. I'm not entirely
B&M
sure
Value
whether...
European Retail, I think.
Yeah, it's the proper name now. Let's talk about the National Grid, up 2% today.
Yeah, they've sold their US renewables assets to Brookfield, a well-established infrastructure investor. It's intriguing that National Grid is selling its US onshore wind and battery storage and solar power at a time when a lot of investors have slightly turned their back on those assets, or at least asked companies to be clear about what they want to be. But this isn't a panic reaction on National Grid's perspective to either investor pressure or President Trump's pro-oil and gas policy. They announced this last May. They seem to have got a pretty decent price for it, and the company's got a very strong, clear idea of where it wants to go and what it wants to be, so the shares are up 2%. Be intriguing to see if BP, another company under pressure to define its strategy, is quite so clear when it describes its new strategy on Wednesday.
Russ, let's talk about delivery companies. You know, they had a massive boom, didn't they, during the pandemic? We all thought essentially we're going to order all our food online, not least of all takeaways. But that hasn't necessarily happened. Talk to me about Just Eat, because they've had a bit of a rollercoaster ride.
Yeah, I mean, the shares are down about 90% from their highs in 2021. There's a bit of relief today, and the company may be put out of shareholders' misery because of a bid from South African investment specialist Prosus, which is a stake in lots of other delivery companies. I think the challenge ultimately is that Just Eat has never made a profit after tax using statutory accounting measures, and that's because of competition from other delivery services, from well-established brands who've got their own delivery. You can go to a restaurant, you can go to a pub, you can use an online meal kit, you can go to the supermarket and even cook the stuff yourself if you want to. So there's no shortage of competition there, and Just Eat just hasn't really been able to crack it. One big acquisition went badly wrong, and even today with the share price up 50%, if you were unlucky enough to buy at the top, you're still going to do around 80% of your money.
And just very briefly, 30 seconds, Ross, if you can. We always like to set you a challenge. Markets haven't really moved on the German elections. Perhaps unsurprising, given the result.
I think
is unsurprising.
Yeah, I think the result has been unsurprising, and the strategy that the new government's going to have, if it can form a coalition of cutting taxes, cutting bureaucracy, and establishing growth, well, we're hearing that from a lot of governments. Let's see if they can achieve it.
OK, Russ Mould, as always, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. OK, well, that is it from me on Business Live for the moment. Don't forget, we are back at 4:30 this afternoon with the very latest business news. Do join me then if you can. Coming up next, it is the rest of the day's news, including the latest on the Pope's health. We've had an update, several updates indeed, it must be said, via the Vatican this morning, and also that Ukrainian conference taking place in Kyiv. We've heard from the Prime Minister in the last couple of minutes. That's coming up at midday with me. Stay tuned for that, and back later. This is Sky News Today. It's 12 o'clock and these are your headlines. The Prime Minister urges Western leaders to ramp up sanctions on Vladimir Putin and force concessions from Russia in peace talks over Ukraine.
Russia does not hold all the cards in this war because the Ukrainians have the courage to defend their country.
Also ahead this hour, we're expecting to hear live from the man who's set to be Germany's next Chancellor after his party's election victory. The Vatican says that Pope Francis is in good spirits following his 10th night in hospital as he continues treatment for double pneumonia. Suspended Labour MP Mike Amesbury is due to be sentenced later for punching a man following a row on a street in Cheshire. And Demi Moore is among the winners at the Screen Actor Guilds Awards, a major predictor of Oscar success with just 1 week to go. A very good afternoon on this Monday. Now, the Prime Minister has urged G7 nations to take a risk and hit Russia's economy with more sanctions ahead of any peace talks.